Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Power Hour webinar discussing intelligent message mapping so that your incredibly important messages land in the appropriate audience in 2020 and beyond. My name is Navah Hopkins. I'm over at WordStream, and I'm delighted to have as my co-panelist Amy Bishop. She is the founder, owner, chief marketer. She's gonna hate me because we were just talking about this. She wants to be the owner and marketer, but chief strategist, incredibly brilliant, for a force for good behind Cultivate Marketing. And to kick us off, we're going to share a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about why this topic is so important to us, and then we'll dive right into content. Let me just pull open screen. So a little bit about me. I've been in digital marketing since 2008, really diving headlong into PPC in 2012. And the reason why this topic is so important to me is that I find that a lot of folks invest so much time in what I like to call the grunt work, like the mechanics of management, that it takes a lot of effort to take a step back and think creatively, analytically, and innovatively about how our messages are landing and actually investing the time in making good creative. And one of my absolute favorite perspectives in the space is Amy Bishop. So I asked her if we could do this webinar, and she said yes. And Semrush, whichever you guys prefer, was kind enough to host us. Both of us have been top 25 influential PPC folks. We speak on the international circuit. And Amy, did you want to say a couple things about yourself, why this topic is interesting to you?
Yeah, so I've been doing this since about 2010. Really, as Nava said, focusing on digital media, paid search, paid social, and you really nailed it on why it's important. We spend so much time optimizing our campaigns, and there's this piece that seems to be commonly missing, which is just making sure that the messages are really speaking to the person that you're trying to speak to. And we'll talk a little bit about ads today. It's also not just ads, it's landing pages and making sure that the content that you create is really relevant to the people that you're trying to target and what they're interested in, because ultimately we'll be most successful at selling if we're taking a look not just from our perspective at pushing things, but what do they care about, what problems are they trying to solve, and how can we help them solve them?
Exactly. So we divided this webinar up into 3 basic parts. The first part I'm going to cover is the audience breakdown, really giving you guys the fundamentals of the different audiences, what their use cases are, kind of some golden ratios there. Amy will then pick it up with persona building. I cannot overstate how much you all should be taking down notes, like really thinking about this going into 2020. She's going to give you a lot of really good actionable content. And then we're both going to roast some ad copy. Some of the ads are going to be great. Some of them will be or will have room for improvement. But everything comes from a place of goodness. I do want to give a shout out to our comments section, our question section. We're each going to take turns monitoring those questions. And of course, we have the amazing Forces for Good at Semrush monitoring those questions as well. We will have a general Q&A at the end. But if a really important question comes up and you're just like, I got to get this out, do not be shy. Type in those questions. And if we see it in the moment, we'll try to build it into the conversation. Otherwise, we'll cover it during the general Q&A. Amy, anything I missed in terms of housekeeping, in terms of topics before we dive into the content?
I don't think so. I think you nailed it.
All right, let's do this. So I would argue that the most important part of advertising is the people. We need to speak to our customers, not just talk at them, not just hit them over the head with messaging. We really need to engage them and understand who they are and what motivates them. And audiences, in truth, are based on not just our interactions with our brand, but also behaviors they exhibit outside of their interactions with us. The world is not about us, the world is about them and how we can potentially engage with them in a positive way. And so what was really interesting, this is WordStream data looking at advertisers who had at least $1 of spend in September of 2019 and at least one conversion. What I found really fascinating is that folks are far less likely to engage with you and your creative if there is no audience protecting, pre-qualifying that messaging. What I also found really interesting, and I wasn't expecting this, is that similar audiences, so the audiences that Google creates based off of whatever audience actions you've told it to track, whether it's converters, site visitors, whatever, had the second highest, or no, actually third highest click-through rate. Not surprised that website visitors had the highest. Customer lists, again, also fairly high there. We'll talk about the mechanics. But it's really important to note that going into 2020, not pre-qualifying your ads with an audience is setting them up for failure. The cost per acquisition doubles down on this concept. If you have no audience, you should expect that cost per acquisition to be high, because you're not pre-qualifying your messaging with the actual intelligence to ensure that it's going to land. Now, in terms of the winners here, in terms of CPA, custom intent, the customer list, website visitors, we're all in a good spot. What I found really interesting, though, in the CPA lineup, and I wasn't expecting, I'm a big proponent of in-market audiences. So people who have displayed the behavior that they are in market for the things that you do. Google will dynamically put you in a list based off of the sites you visit, based off of the searches that you do. I was expecting this CPA to be lower, in fact, lower than website visitors. And so this was kind of a good cautionary tale for those of us that love audiences, not to put trust blindly, really audit each industry and audit each initiative for which audience will serve us best. And then finally, when it comes to conversion rate, no surprise that no audience was on the lower end. But what I also kind of redeemed for me, the in-market audience, was that it had the highest. So this is where we get into that conversation I love having with customers. Do you value volume or value greater? So in-market is really, really good at just getting those leads in. We have to assess, though, whether we're happy with the cost of each of those leads and if those leads truly are worth that additional value or that additional premium. So as I mentioned, audiences can include folks who have been to our site, who've shown interest in a topic, have shown interest in our products or services, or are part of a desired demographic. So I'm going to leave this up for a second. I want you all to kind of take it in while I'm telling you the story. I am an avid Star Wars fan, avid pet lover. And when I was hunting for my pet, what it turns out is that I actually got an ad for an animal shelter on a Star Wars site. So what's interesting is that we could see remarketing here. We could see potentially affinity, in-market, and keyword targeting for that contextual targeting of the content. And so just because someone's in an audience doesn't necessarily mean that they're a perfect fit. You want to pre-qualify and kind of think about your perfect customer. So it's not just about the message, it's also about what is the context around that message. So for me, as a pet lover and a Star Wars nerd, this was unequivocally perfect. And I hope all of you are going to be good citizens and have a spoiler-free existence with the Star Wars movie coming up. But that's just some of the things to think about when you're thinking about creative and the mechanics of audiences. So that audience type number one, that they interacted with your site, a lot of people forget that YouTube and Facebook videos can be that remarketing piece too. And what's interesting is that YouTube videos come in at, on average, about 2 cents a view, Facebook at about a penny a view. Um, Also interesting is the view time. But you can actually build remarketing lists not just based off of people interacting with your site, but people interacting with your video content. That can be particularly useful if you want to really hit home a particular message. Display, absolutely powerful when it comes to building remarketing lists for search ads. So again, that remarketing piece. And what's interesting is that we found that for about $500 per month, we're able to effectively get that remarketing list for search ad list. So you need at minimum 1,000 people in a list in order to exclusively target them. So for $500 a month, that's not bad to create a curated list to perfectly match your messaging. The second audience type is that they've searched for or showed interest in your service. They are in market for that service. So available in-market audiences, I'm not going to read the list to you, but do note, and I said it a little bit earlier, when you're in market for something, you're not going to be in market for it forever. When I was buying my house, I got flagged as in market for buying a house. And so I was targeted aggressively for insurance vendors. I also actually, ironically enough, got flagged for auto companies. And what was interesting about that is that these marketers were intelligent to know that I was buying a house. I therefore may have additional tangential needs that would speak to it. Life events are another good one, particularly if you need to protect yourself, say, for example, from students. You can exclude folks that are graduating soon or recently graduated. You also may decide from a moving, say you're doing um, what's it called, commercial real estate, you may want to exclude people who are quote unquote moving because you care far more about those high value or B2B or business to business leads. You don't really want to get yourself tied into the weeds with B2C or business to consumer. The third audience type is customer match or with email. A cautionary tale here, you actually can only use this audience type if your account has been running for at least 90 days. It has a lifetime spend of $50,000. You have a dedicated Google rep and you have no policy violations. However, once you clear those hurdles, nothing can compare with being able to perfectly match your messages to that curated list. And as we saw in the data earlier, really good gains based off of targeting your ads to those specific messages. The fourth type is that they've displayed interests and behaviors, whether it's affinity or custom affinity, that they are your sort of people. This is going to be less so that they're in market for your service, but more, and Amy will really get into this in terms of building personas, they are aligned with your brand. I do want to give a shout out to similar audiences. We found that folks that use similar audiences see 60% more impressions, which who cares? That's kind of a vanity metric. But more importantly, those 60% more impressions trickle down to 48% more clicks, which trickle down in turn to 41% more conversions. I am not going to stand here and say that similar audiences are perfect. They're not. But they are a very easy way to test the water with layering in audiences based off of, say, similar to converters. So a couple of last minute notes before I hand the reins off to Amy is a checklist on whether an audience should be on target and observe or just observe, i.e., should you be exclusively targeting people in this list, in this audience list, or should you have it on an observation, either bidding it up, bidding it down, or just viewing it? So if the message changes based off of the audience, you may want to have it on target or target and observe as opposed to just observe. However, if it's under 1,000 people, you will have to keep it on just observe. If it's targeting display or video, you probably want it on target and observe because you want to be able to filter in on those exact people that you've created this messaging for. And if you favor the audience, but you're really open to everybody, it would be kind of shooting yourself in the foot to do target and observe because then you would be stunting your volume, particularly on search. If it's a remarketing search campaign, you have to have it on target and observe because the whole point is that you're targeting off of initial engagement. But you may also need to get the data to prove that the audience is worth targeting, and that's when that observation mode is really key. Another shout out to the B2B, B2C dynamic and the power that audiences have in protecting us. Bing or Microsoft actually has, through their LinkedIn acquisition, job title. So you can actually target or exclude folks based off of that job title. Google also has some of that data, not LinkedIn data, just employment data. So you can make some of those choices. But I definitely recommend considering what are those in-market or affinities or intents that B2B or B2C may imply that you then can have as a target or an exclusion. And then finally, audiences can be used for ad customizers. Say you have the perfect messaging for an audience, but you're not going to have enough people for a list to target and observe. You absolutely can use those if statements to adjust your creative for that audience. This is particularly useful if you're targeting folks, say, for example, off of a YouTube watch or YouTube view. If you have messaging that kind of mirrors or parrots the ideas in that video, you absolutely want to kind of drill those ideas home and pull that creative into your search copy. Whereas kind of a generic user who's never engaged with your content before, you may want to leave things a little bit more open. So I realized that was a ton. Take some time to jot down the questions, and we're actually going to turn things over to Amy. So Amy, are you able to grab screen?
Yep.
Okay. I will stop sharing.
All right. So Navah did a great job of walking us through why audiences are important, ways that you can use audiences, and really just kind of a really good overview and a foundation. So what we're going to do now is just start to kind of build on that. But before we do that, I want to actually take it just one step backward and say, I want you to put yourself in a situation. I want you to imagine that you walk onto a car lot and a salesperson approaches you. They don't know anything about you. They don't know your needs. They don't know what vehicle you're currently driving, or if you have a vehicle. They don't know anything about your family or your hobbies, and they're just going to try to sell you a car. I mean, that would be insane, right? So just imagine they're trying to pick the right car for you without knowing anything about you. The likelihood that they would be wrong is very high, but the likelihood that they would frustrate you if they kept pushing you towards this certain car that was not a fit for your needs is even higher. So any salesperson knows this. They would get to know you before they tried to show you a single car to make sure that they were showing you something that would best suit your needs. Well, your website is basically your digital salesperson. So your website's job is to educate, guide, and convert. But the only way that it can really do that is if it's collecting information at different steps to understand who this prospect is, what they care about, what they're looking for, what problem they're solving, so that it can start to guide them in the right direction, which will ultimately help solve their problem. And it will also solve our problem, which is that we need more sales, right? So in order to best do this, I like to start by just kind of mapping out personas. So in an ideal world, every client would have personas already. Ideally, they would be detailed, they would be accurate, they would be grounded in data, they would be validated. But we all know that we don't live in an ideal world. More often than not, when I start working with clients, they don't have personas that are already mapped out. So ideally, what we would want to know is, what are their demographics? Where do they obtain information from? What are their hobbies? What problems are they solving for? Because every service or solution solves a problem for somebody. That's why there's a market for it. What are their priorities? And what are different factors in their decision-making process? Here, it's in Google Doc. We're not going to open it today, but it's different for B2B and B2C. If you want to download it, you're more than welcome to. It just walks through different questions that you can ask to help identify and hone in on who that persona is. It's really good to have this conversation also with your salespeople and with your customer service team. They're client-facing. They get a really good sense of what problems that consumers are trying to solve that leads them to your business, so that you can go find more people like them. And don't be afraid to have multiple personas. No business should just have one persona. If they do, it's probably a little bit too general. And I probably shouldn't say no business, but most businesses shouldn't just have one persona. There are typically multiple, and then in a lot of cases, there are also multiple decision makers or key influencers. Sometimes there's a buying team. So just keep that in mind as well as you're going through that process. Once we have our personas defined, what we want to do is start to kind of map out, what does that purchase path look like for them, and what decision factors are important to them. So I like to use this map. And basically what this says is, for this particular persona, we would do this separately for each persona. What stage are they in? What information do they currently need to get to the next stage? They may be using multiple devices, so we may have actions or resources that are better for certain devices than others. And then how can we track or ensure that we are creating audiences off of that action, so that we know that they're taking that action, so we can see if it's successful or not, but also so that we can continue to target them, knowing that they've interacted with this, which tells us something about them. So it starts to look something like this, where we have this one persona here. And so for instance, in this one, this person, they're researching car comparisons. So maybe just at that kind of high level, they just want some unbiased car comparisons. So we would send them to the vehicle comparison tool on desktop. If they're on mobile, that tool is a little bit cumbersome, so we'll send them to a video. But then as they're starting the consideration process, maybe the things that are most important to them are gas mileage, safety rating, seating info. That tells you something about who this person is that hopefully you would already know by having identified their persona. But if it were a different persona, those key information pieces could be totally different. For instance, somebody that's buying a sports car may not have the highest priority of gas mileage or the number of people that it seats. So this is why it's really important to make sure that you know who you're targeting, what they're interested in. And we start by having a good sense of who that persona is, but that doesn't mean that if they give us other signals that we stick with just what we know about that persona. If they're giving us other signals, then we should be learning from those and making sure that we're adjusting accordingly. So I want to talk about leveraging those audiences in ads. So as Navah mentioned, we have the ability to customize our ads based upon the audiences that people fall into. And based upon the spreadsheet that we just looked at, we would have a lot of audiences that are built out based upon different actions that people have taken. There are also some different ways that we can build out audiences. And one of those is driving data collection through the media targeting. So in certain platforms, we have the ability to be really specific about what demographics and interests that we would want to target, and we can build audiences off of that. So it could look something like this, where we're defining the demographics in social ads, and we're using that to create audiences so that if those people don't convert and they come back through search, we know something about who they are, and we're making sure that we're speaking to them and we're sending them to the most accurate content based upon what we know about them and what they're interested in. This is also good on the B2B side. So if you've ever worked with a client before that works on the B2B side, but that has a lot of B2C noise in their search queries, there are times when it would make sense to use audiences that you've built off LinkedIn and import those into Google to layer them over your search campaigns to make sure that you're only targeting that B2B audience if the queries are a little bit more general. Sometimes with more specific queries, that's really not necessary, and you don't need to limit them. And then, of course, on the Bing side, with the LinkedIn integration, there's a lot of stuff that you can do natively that you don't necessarily have to do as manually by creating those audiences. And then also new versus returning users. This is something that I see as a big opportunity. So you may want to speak to these folks differently. It could be something like, hey, nice to meet you, check out our cool stuff. When they come back, it's not that we want to condition them by always offering them a promo, but if we know something that they're interested in and that thing happens to be on sale, we should show it to them. But no matter what, we know something about what they're interested in. So delivering them the most accurate content based upon that can be really valuable. And then for people that have already purchased, it could be something like, welcome back, have you seen our loyalty program? And I'm going to share an example of why this is important to me. I had a client that had a lot of repeat purchasers. And what they found was when they launched a remarketing campaign, it looked really good. It was driving a lot of purchases. The stats looked great. But when I looked into it and I looked at when they launched the remarketing campaign, their overall repeat purchaser trends didn't change. So ultimately, they launched this remarketing campaign. Now this remarketing campaign was getting all the credit for the repeat sales, but most of them they were going to actually get anyway. So what we did was we took a look at just those repeat purchaser timeframes to try to understand if somebody's going to be a repeat purchaser, when will they come back and purchase? And we built out these timeframes. We built out audiences around that. And then we basically excluded those folks. And we built out their email campaigns to say, let's have these people get an email when they're most likely to be a repeat purchaser. Then we'll follow up with another email. And if they don't respond to those, then we'll start remarketing them right outside of this time frame to try to make sure that any of those repeat purchasers that we were already going to get, we weren't just robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking credit through the remarketing campaign and ultimately spending more money on media than we needed to. So that's why mapping out these messages and mapping out these audiences can be really, really valuable. So now I want to talk about one of my very favorite things, and I use this to drive the most value with audiences, and that is the audiences report within the audience report in Google Analytics. It's confusing nomenclature. I did not name it. I wish that they would change it. But within the audiences report, there's so much information that you can see. And in order to set this up, you just want to make sure that when you create your audiences in Google Analytics, that when you enable them for Google Ads, you also send them into Google Analytics. Again, something a little bit weird, so you shouldn't necessarily have to tell Google Analytics that it can use something that it created, but in this case, you have to. So that will set it up for you. And then the reason that I think that it is so valuable is because most of Google Analytics is based upon last touch. So performance by source is only going to show you part of the picture. And as you're mapping out these audiences, one of the main reasons that people like to do this is to make sure that they have a really nice flow from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel. But then you look at your top of funnel campaigns in Google Analytics, and sometimes they don't look very good because it's only showing part of the picture. So in this case, we're looking at the source medium report within the acquisition reports. And as you can see, this particular channel is not doing very well. It's one that we primarily use for top of funnel. But if we dig in and we look at the audience that is built off of that campaign, we see that the audience looks much better. And ultimately, what we see is the audience report indicates almost 15 times more revenue for this particular campaign than what the source report reports. And so you might be thinking, wait, what? So the acquisition report just shows that last touch performance, which for a top of funnel campaign is typically not going to look very good. But the audience report shows the longer term performance of any given audience. In this case, it's built off of that top of funnel campaign. And so it's going to show you the longer term performance of those efforts. And ultimately, it's going to tell us, did those people in that audience convert? Now, we know that there have been other touches on it since that, so we wouldn't necessarily attribute all of that value back to the top of funnel campaign. But we also know that we wouldn't have that revenue if it weren't for the top of funnel campaign. So shutting off that top of funnel campaign would probably be a mistake, depending on how much more money has been spent in that time. It tells us so much, though. When you go into that audiences report, it's going to show you all of the audiences that you have enabled for the audience report, and it's going to give you data like this, just about their user behavior of the folks that fall within those audiences. You can also add secondary dimensions. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this. The three main ways that I like to use this particular report are, one, to get a sense of if we had more money, where should we put it to try to drive more value? That's one. But two, an audience is really only as good as it is big. So if we start putting a lot of money behind one audience, but the audience isn't growing, it's only going to work for so long before it just starts to burn out. So the second thing is, which audiences do we need to focus on growing? And then the third thing is, these audiences don't have to be built just off of targets. They can also be built off of things like, which sources did these folks come from, and which micro conversions have they completed? And that's going to give us a sense of what is actually influencing these people long term. So for instance, if we have a guide and we have an ebook, we could create an audience off of each of those, and then we could monitor to see long term which of those seem to actually have influenced that audience to ultimately purchase. Another example would be, do they ultimately become purchasers? You may or may not know. Is it better to get them to sign up for the blog or the email newsletter? You may or may not know. But if you tracked both of those as audiences, you could get a sense of long-term which of those are converting, which ones aren't. And we also have more opportunities even once we get past that. So we can actually leverage audiences and custom views, set dimensions, custom reports. And then if you have Google Analytics 360, you can also use custom funnels. So this means there are so many different ways that you can now take all of this data and mash it up with other reports. So one of my favorite ways is to look at the behavior flow report. And this is going to give you a sense of, as these people are coming back that were in this audience, how are they engaging with content? And this is going to allow us to go back and validate what we had mapped out in that Excel file to get a sense of, were we right? Is this the right content that these people are interested in as we're flowing them through? Or do we need to make changes? We can also layer it over the behavior reports to get a sense of what content resonates well with them. And we could change our landing pages if we needed to based upon that. And then just kind of this last piece, reporting on audience performance. So this is something that I think is really valuable. I'm passionate about it. What you can actually do is you can create custom dashboards by audience. And the reason that I find this valuable is there's so much information that you can garner from this. So one, you can get a sense of, what do transaction trends look like for that particular audience? And the reason that this can be really important is, if we start putting more money behind this audience, and if we start putting more money into creating more of this audience and growing the audience pool, is that changing anything about the behavior of the audience? So let's say, for instance, if our audience was built off of people that downloaded a particular guide, and we decided that audience is really well, we want to grow it. We were starting with Facebook, but now we're going to do GDN, we're going to do YouTube. As we start to blow those up, is there any difference in the quality of our audience? We can monitor that trend here. we can also get a sense of how does this audience break down by in-market segment. And so what that's going to tell us is if we wanted to go find more people like this, what should we start with? Now, I would not go just off of this chart right here. I would also go into the actual demographic reports, take a look at conversion rates, take a look at average user value, because just going off of pure audience size isn't going to be a good start. But you can also use secondary dimensions to look at those reports to get a better sense of that breakdown as well. This is just going to give you a high level kind of quick look into it. You can also see which sources are converting this audience the best. And then you can just get other kind of health metrics about them too. And this is just one example dashboard. You could build whatever dashboard that your heart desires. But the nice thing is that you can build as many dashboards as you want, or you can just swap out the audience here by changing the custom view segment in order to look at different audiences and get the different data points on those particular audiences. So that's just me geeking out on audiences. And of course, Navah as well. So now we're going to actually talk about some different ads. But before we do that, are there any questions that we should go over before we start looking into ads?
So there was a good question that was asked. How do we use Semrush to help with persona-based message mapping? One of my favorite ways to look at message mappings is actually spying on competitors and seeing what competitor ads are running and what kind of creatives seem to be landing or not landing for the brands I'm not serving. The reason I like auditing the ads and their creative for persona, sometimes my competitors are in fact going after the exact same persona. Other times they define them a little bit differently. It's actually really interesting. WordStream as a brand, we have various personas that span advertiser agency, but our competitors for some of our personas are not the same competitors for other personas. And so being able to see the creative and how certain brands speak to the personas that we care about, maybe because they're high value or because they have longer life cycles. I find that incredibly useful. I also like using the content toolkit just to kind of get ideas of what kind of creative might speak well. I don't know, Amy, do you have any favorite moments in Semrush for persona-based message mapping?
Yeah, so you totally nailed it as far as looking at what competitors are doing. And one of the things that I would add to that too, which you alluded to, is that sometimes our competitors are competitors in certain areas of the business, but they're not competitors in other areas of the business. The other thing that we find is if you're looking at auction insights, sometimes you have competitors that you don't think of as competitors, but they're still bidding on those same keywords that you are. And so it's interesting to see how they're messaging and who they're trying to talk to get a sense of if we really need to worry about them or not. And then if we do, what are they saying, the same way that we would look at the folks that are our competitors. And then there's another piece, and I don't know if it has actually rolled out yet or not, so I hope that I won't get in trouble for saying this. There is a component of looking at audiences and looking at who your competitors, which audiences that they have that are going to their site. And I had early access to that, so I don't know if it's actually fully rolled out yet or not, but it's kind of like the way that you're looking at which in-market audiences that you're trying to target, you can get a sense of which in-market audiences are going to your competitor's site too. So you can just get a sense of, again, I wouldn't just use that to just go right out and say, I'm going to start targeting those people, because it may or may not convert well for you, but you could then go into your own Google Analytics and see what's my conversion rate for those. Even if the volume is relatively low, maybe we want to do something to amp something up here. They may be onto something that we're not. And it gives you a sense of other things that you might want to test and other kind of pools that you might want to go after. Because the cool thing that I found about in-market audiences and affinity audiences is a lot of times there are things that are adjacent to what you're trying to sell. And so the in-market audience that works really well for you may not be specific to what you're selling, but it may just be an indicator that that person is the right persona for you, if that makes sense. So I've had clients, for instance, that are selling luxury items, and it may not be the specific item that they're selling, but it could be that vacations, for instance, are a really good indicator that that somebody might be a good target to them, especially expensive vacations to faraway places, because that may indicate that that person might have more money to spend. And so that can be a good audience for them to get into. So just kind of being able to see that from your competitor side as well can be helpful, because there may be things that you haven't thought of.
One thing, but before we move on to ads, jog my memory. One of the other use cases for audiences, particularly on observation mode, is to get a sense of where your desired persona needs education, where some of the queries that are coming through are like, what? Why are you describing what I do that way? That's really weird. I would have never thought to describe it this way, because we as brands tend to get in our own heads. We get very used to our nomenclature. We get very used to our jargon, and we refuse to pivot. One of my favorite examples of this actually is just the referring to software as either software or platform. People will refer to it as platform. People will refer to it as software. They'll refer to it as a suite, whatever it may be. And you can go to Google Trends. You can go to Semrush. You can go to analytics. You can like look at all of this data. But at the end of the day, when you begin to see how people are searching that convert and actually engage with you and pay you money, like that will help shape your own internal messaging, or let you know that, hey, I got to start running some campaigns to re-educate. And that's really where video can be really empowering, impactful. Display can be really impactful. Actually, Facebook, particularly also story ads, can be super, super impactful there, because those in the moment kind of non-skippable engagements do a lot to kind of plant seeds. So you want to just be mindful of what messaging will do well in each different channel. Cool. That was the main question that I think we want to take a break before we go into ad copy. So I'll put it to the collective. Do we want to see good ads celebrated first, or do we want to see bad ads roasted? I'm gonna give you guys a little bit while I'm pulling it up. It looks like bad ads have it. So give me a second and we will pull this up. Forgive me for having weird screen mechanics for a second. And okay. So Amy, you want to kick us off with this Nespresso ad? Like, coffee is great. Like,
Yeah.
we all love coffee. What's wrong with this ad?
I want to love this ad because I love coffee, and I love the idea of having good coffee that's instant. But to me, this just doesn't say anything to me. So there's a million different ways that you could market to me. I'm a mom. I'm a business owner. There are so many different audiences that I fall into as somebody that feels like I'm always rushing around. There are just different ways that you could market this to me to really speak to why this solves a problem for me, because this machine's not cheap. It's not inexpensive.
No, it's not.
So just to say one machine, 5 coffee sizes, endless enjoyment, it feels like I really needed to get this ad out the door. So I wrote something just so there was something, then I launched it. And then when you look at when you look at the headline and it says Virtuo, I think is what it's called. Machines.
Yeah, Virtuo machine, espresso coffee machine, buying guide. Buying
Yeah.
guide. What?
Yeah. And so is that going to take me to a guide? Is it going to take me to the machine? If it's going to take me to a guide, then why isn't the message about helping you find the right machine for you? And then it says USA, which, I mean, just kind of doesn't necessarily need to be said, because I'm in the USA. So I'm seeing it. I'm assuming that I can buy it here. I just feel like it's a lot of wasted space. And the image just isn't really that compelling. Even if they changed one of the elements, change the image to make it relevant to me, change the message to make it relevant to me, then the headline is just a bunch of words. It's like just keyword stuffed almost, but they're not even good keywords. So, and this is Facebook, so there's no need to even do that. I just feel like this ad across the board is a miss.
So what was funny was when you sent this over, And I was initially like, but it follows all of the, in theory, best practice rules. Short, concise title, headline is kind of cueing you in. It's got shop now. And so this ad was my favorite example of why best practices don't necessarily mean you have an amazing ad. Like that
That's a
statement of
great
endless
point.
enjoyment. Um, Nothing about this ad says endless enjoyment. This person looks like they're about to go off to work. Like very bland colors. There is a degree of like the gold and regal kind of paying into the luxury item, but even just switching it where it's not about espresso and the machine, it's more about the person having that endless enjoyment that comes from that first sip of coffee in the morning. Like we've all been there, at least those of us that that love coffee, that symphony that comes with drinking coffee, it's lost because this ad is focusing on the machine instead of the person. So to Amy's point, there are so many ways that you could target her. There are so many facets to her amazing life. Yet, Espresso completely missed the mark. I fully agree with you here. They focused on themselves and they
Yes.
ignored their consumers and potentially lost. Well, they're getting some free publicity here because we're heckling them, but they probably lost that opportunity to secure Amy and others as a customer.
It's very product focused. I'm
Yep.
sure they have a good product, but they could have converted me if the ad was more relevant to me.
If it actually engaged you. So Buttercloth.
Okay,
What's up
so
with Buttercloth, man?
this one I actually don't hate. And the reason that I don't hate it, just to be even more specific, is this one's targeted to me. I am married. I do most of my husband's shopping. And I like that they acknowledge that this is not for me. It's that they're targeting me to buy it for someone else. And I think that that's clever on their part. On the flip side, I would say there are a lot of ways that this could go wrong. Just because I'm married doesn't mean that I'm married to a man. But I would say I would hope that they've tested this to get a sense of whether or not it works well. But I do like that they seem to actually know something about me and that they know that this ad that they're showing me is not for me to purchase, not for me to use. They are trying to solve a problem by saying guaranteed to make the man in your life look incredible, and that my husband is obsessed with it and won't remove his shirt. I don't necessarily know that those are like the problems that I'm specifically trying to solve, but it's a good try in that they're trying to solve problems. It's
Yeah.
still a little bit about them.
So the one thing I'll add, because we have a bunch of ads. We both had way too much fun with the Espresso ad. I do like that this is a subtitled video ad as opposed to forcing the user to listen to to the video ad on Facebook.
Good point.
A very important mechanic to think about with your content is what is the user state of mind. Um, while we can talk about whether this ad is or is not great and going to convert, I do want to give them props for the subtitles and that they acknowledge that a Facebook video user is not going to really listen for the volume. They're going to engage with the creative first and then decide to turn on the volume. Cool. So let's move on. Home field apparel.
Okay, this one I actually don't hate either. And the reason that I like this one is because I am a Purdue fan. So they
Ooh.
acknowledge that. And a lot of times when I see apparel that's specific to a sports team, it's not the one that I like, which seems like a huge miss. So like, for instance, if I see NFL apparel and it's not specific to the Colts, if I see college athletic wear and it's not Purdue, that's a big miss because there are definitely a lot of ways that they could target me to know which team that I'm for and show me the most appropriate products based upon that. And even though it does take some extra legwork, your conversion rates will show it and it'll definitely be worth it. I also like that they say it's the most comfortable apparel that you'll ever own. I would like if they made the headlines on the specific products different instead of
Yep.
having the same one for each. And there's a lot of stuff that you can do dynamically with that if this is a dynamically populated ad. But even if it's not, you can still be more specific to that particular piece of apparel. I also like for products that are not expensive, I like when they include prices. I just think that that's a good experience. But when products are more expensive or luxury items, it also can make sense not to include the prices. So that's something that I would at least suggest testing if I were them. But I would expect with t-shirts that it would fall into the realm of makes sense to include a price. And then I also like that it includes a discount, although I like that because I'm a consumer and I want that discount. But this was a prospecting ad. And so I would say you don't necessarily need to always go in with a discount as your first impression. If they were just running a sale anyway, then that's great. But I would say try to get that purchase initially without the discount before coming in with a discount.
One little note I'll add on these ads. I'm a big control freak when it comes to variables. I like having a control. And so the to the point of having the headlines the same, I agree that they should have some variety, at least in terms of testing. What I think was a missed opportunity for home field apparel is that they didn't keep with the same design of shirt and show different styles of shirt. They went with different designs and styles of shirt. The reason why I struggle with that is that the different styles of shirts are going to have different prices. And it inherently invites the upsell, which could potentially be great. So and these ads have actually gotten me, like I've bought off of these sorts of ads with kind of geeky merchandise. There's actually a pair of boots that I have coming where you can see kind of the different ways that the interesting image will be applied on the clothing. Whereas if there's too much variety, it almost is the paradox of choice. So for me, the major missed opportunity here is that home field apparel chose not to lead with one style of creative that then was shown on multiple different formats that would give us a sense of what kind of apparel merchandise we could get from them, as opposed to here's a whole bunch of different styles. Fingers crossed that the one that serves first you like. So there's my 2 cents on those. We're gonna now switch, I think. Oh nope, you got one more.
One more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then we're gonna switch to ads that came from a place of positivity.
So, so we have this Facebook ad is one I actually like, and then the next 2 ads are going to be ones that are not as great, and I'll explain why. But with this Facebook ad, I actually like it. The reason I like it is I think that it combines a lot of really strong elements. So it solves a problem for me. It knows that I'm a digital marketer, and it's saying make studio ads in minutes with Spotify Ad Studio. It doesn't go right into just a feature list, but it's just telling me ultimately the combination of our features will solve this problem for you. And then I like that it's really bright and it grabs your attention. And then it also has different customer testimonials, which is a really nice way to build up credibility. Again, though, I feel like in the headlines, and in the descriptions, they have not come in as strong. And I think that's really easy to do because people think that those don't matter as much because there aren't as many characters there. But that's still an opportunity to make a point and add a value proposition to try to get people to click through and try to get people to convert. And those are a little bit bland here. But ultimately, I think this is a fairly strong ad.
I have a theory as to why those really ridiculous titles exist. People who are Google first advertisers or Google first marketers really struggle when it comes to the creativity that's for Facebook. The people that are Facebook first marketers, I find, struggle with the mechanics and the rules of engagement changes on Google. And I feel like this sort of creative is someone lifting their text ads or even their display ad text onto Facebook, and they're not honoring the channel subtleties and like what will make someone actually engage. So speaking of text ads, Harry and David, this is so big and beautiful. What's wrong with it?
So ultimately, this is one that I think if you were just seeing it for the first time, if you were brand new to Harry and David, this is a really good ad. So it has really good content. It makes use of 4 different site links that are the expanded text. It takes up a lot of real estate on the page, has a seller ratings. It looks really good. The reason that I don't particularly like it is because I actually have started a gift list with Harry and David, and some of my gifts have been sent. Some others, I have a list of people that I need to give to, but I haven't finished actually sending my gifts. And yet when I see ads from them, and as I'm doing searches, it doesn't acknowledge the fact that I have already been to their site. I've already started the process of making out a list of people that I need to send gifts to that I have not finished sending gifts to. So to me, it's just a really big missed opportunity of all of the things that we've talked about today, which is that they definitely know that I am a person that should be sending more things through them. And there's an opportunity to convert me, to get me to do that. And they haven't used that at all. In all of this beautiful real estate that they haven't in any way acknowledged that I'm half done sending gifts and that I should come back and finish sending gifts, which is like everything that we've talked about today. And knowing Harry and David, that's a pretty big site. They have pretty big audience pools. I have no doubt that they have an audience pool that's big enough for them to be customizing ads specific to people that have shown an interest by creating that list that haven't actually finished going through and completing those. And they send me a ton of emails about it, so I know I am on a list, but they could be using that same list in search as well.
And for the record, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have double the campaigns or double the ad groups. You can use those ad customizers to just swap out the creative. So this is really just an instance of they chose to, I don't want to say call it dumb money, but we'll call it simplistic messaging. They're not taking the fullest advantage of their creative and monetary investment.
Exactly. And now would be the key time. I mean,
Exactly.
to be making that making use of that investment.
So with video, and I think we'll only have time to go through these. And so if any of you have questions or thoughts before we dive into this final example on the ads that you're going to see in the second half, absolutely tweet at us. Twitters are in the bottom corner at Hoffman8, at Navah F. You can tag hashtag SCMrush. But we'll finish off reviewing this ad, and then we'll open it up to general questions. So yeah, Amy, what's up with this? Like, they're giving us offers, they're showing the product being used. Like, what do we love? What do we hate?
So it's hard to show a video ad as an example, because the only way to kind of capture a video ad to share with somebody else is to screenshot it, unless it's publicly available on their YouTube. So just kind of bear with me here. The ad itself is a decent ad. It's an ad for a subscription, and it is somebody walking through what you would get with that subscription. And it seems to be fairly authentic. It would seem to be coming from a subscriber. I'm not sure if it is or not, but I actually thought that the video was decent. And I think that for a subscription box, it's good to have videos that appear to come from your subscribers, as that can boost your credibility. The problem is that this particular ad was telling you exactly what the subscription is, and it was sharing exactly what types of stuff that you would get in the subscription. And then there was an offer for first-time subscribers. And I'm already a subscriber. I'm in the middle of a subscription. So that is just wasted money, especially on YouTube. It's wasted money to show me this ad when, I didn't skip it because I wanted to take screenshots. So I'm sorry, BoxyCharm, but you should exclude me. So it's really your fault.
They're paying the price for not excluding you.
But not even just on YouTube, where at least on YouTube I could skip it. I see their ads all the time on Facebook, and it's the same thing, where it's an explanation of what the subscription is. I understand that there are reasons that I myself have targeted certain subscribers in order to try to build up comments. But in that case, the content would need to be different. It shouldn't just be an explanation. It should be kind of reaching out, asking for user-generated content. in order to try to collect that in the comments, which can be really helpful and really powerful to be able to then go and use elsewhere. But this particular ad and the other ads just seem to be remarketing with no exclusions whatsoever. And they're really focused on bringing in new subscribers. And there's even a bonus for brand new subscribers, which they talk about in the video as well. And I would not be qualified for that because I
Well, you
would
could
not
cheat.
be. Yeah,
You
I
could
could go
use like
sign up with another email, but then that would be really expensive. So anyway, this is just like one of those perfect examples of if they knew their audience and if they were mapping their audience, that's not the ad they would be showing me. They're actually upgrades. So this is the bottom tier subscription, and that's what I have. So they could be marketing to me and trying to get me to upgrade to a better subscription, and that would make complete sense. But again, there's just that mapping is just missing here.
So it sounds like the major takeaway for everyone here, if there's one thing that they take away, is to audit your audiences and do not be afraid to exclude people who do not make sense, i.e., having that converter list, having those hooks in place so that you're not bombarding people that you all have already secured with the same messaging as people that you're prospecting with.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Cool. I know we're short on time. I want to take a quick check back. I'm going to stop sharing and head back over, see if there's any questions. Let's see. So do we want to maybe just finish off with like the one thing that we go tell people to do? I realize I just did that with the exclusions, but do we want to maybe have like that like one go do? You have one go do off of this webinar, what would it be?
I would say if there is one thing to go do, it would be, this is a one thing, I'm combining two things into one thing. It would be to make sure that you have defined your personas and understanding who they are. Hopefully that's already done, but if not, that's part one of this. And then part two would be taking those personas and getting a sense of what that purchase path looks like. And it doesn't even just end at the purchase, but from purchase to also repeat purchases and any kind of upgrades or upsells, and making sure that you're mapping out what that journey should look like in kind of a best case scenario, and then mapping your ads and messaging to that to make sure that you're providing the best experience, but then using Google Analytics to monitor that as well and making changes as you need to.
Definitely. And I'm going to answer some of the questions I just saw pop up in responding to your brilliant takeaway. Like when you're getting that return on investment, that ROI on not just your ad spend, but your creative time. Part of it is identifying, hey, this message makes sense for this person. And you're only going to know that if you have them at minimum on observation. So whether you're using audiences via Google, whether you're using audiences via Facebook, whether you're using audiences via analytics, you want to have something in place that you can track user behavior. In terms of my takeaway, my big takeaway is kind of akin to yours, where this is why we get along and why I want to tag team this webinar with you. Is to not just audit the path, but also the profitability of the personas that you're going after. Just like not every product or service makes sense to go after, it's not going to make sense for you to run a campaign for everything. So too, not every persona is going to make sense to actively target and invest all this effort into, because it is a lot of work to come up with the creative messaging to map everything. So when you're reviewing your prospects, you want to think about how much is that prospect worth, how many new people can you support, and where could that number grow to, and how much of your consumers, or how many of your consumers will be one and dones versus you can grow and upsell them. So like with Amy's example, that was a missed opportunity to upsell her rather than annoy her with an ad. And that would have been easily caught had they audited their audiences, audited their persona values. With that, we're a minute away. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Semrush, for hosting us. I'm Navah Hopkins over at WordStream. You can follow me on Twitter, connect with me, ask me any questions you didn't get the chance to ask at NavaF. And then Amy, do you want to sign off?
Yeah, I'm Amy Bishop with Cultivative Marketing, and I saw a couple questions that came in, so I will try to get back to YouTube and answer those questions in the comments. But it was great to do this with you, Navah. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I look forward to talking to you guys in the future.
Bye, guys. Thank you.